a sociologist, has made that obvious, right? So it becomes obvious in this that Democritus is important, Socrates is important, Plato is of course important. Then there's Pyrrho. Pyrrho is a skeptic, right? So in fact, if you I don't know if it's used in English that much, the Pyrrhonic victory comes from Pyrrho, right? Huh? Yes. Right? So, and then there's Zeno, so Epicurus. So all these intellectual currents have been visualized in this network, which would be very hard to get out of that one. Okay? Now let's keep moving a little bit. In fact, not only that, if you look at Socrates' own influences, because Socrates is the hub out of which all of ancient Greek philosophy sort of comes out of, right? And strangely enough, he's a hub both for the past and the future. Meaning, everyone from Socrates onwards is of course influenced by Socrates, but anyone before Socrates gets synthesized by Socrates, right? So Parmenides is there, Heraclitus is there, Empedocles, Pythagoras. So in a sense, Socrates is, in a modern network sense, a hub for a very, very important intellectual tradition. But the only way you can get that is by looking at these far more sparse data, okay, which comes from understanding how the history of these disciplines work. So that's really the question that I think had of network analysis, is that if you want to understand real history, if you want to understand evolution, if you want to understand how people actually change their minds, how do you go from this one to this one? Right? Is there a way to get that out of the data itself? At least in 1998, I didn't see how that was going to be done. Now, I don't know if that has changed now. Right? But let's keep moving along the same way. Let's go back to the first slide again. There are very few medieval philosophers here. There's Duns Scotus, Joseph de Maistre, Nicholas de Cusa. Just a few of them, Niccolo Machiavelli here. The others are too small to be able to read. But if you look at actual medieval Western philosophy, the most important person is Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas is the one who actually brings Aristotle. Copernicus is a response to Aquinas in some sense. Right? So Aquinas is the person who brings Aristotelian philosophy back into Christianity. So for 1300 years, Plato was the only philosopher that Christians thought about. So from Augustine of Hippo, Saint Augustine, to Aquinas, there was no Aristotle. Right? It's only with Thomas Aquinas that Aristotle comes in a big way into Western philosophy. Aquinas almost got killed for that. He was just way too prominent and too important to be put into the Inquisition. It was pretty close, right? And that was because philosophy was Plato. So how could you go against Plato? Right. So, but from Aquinas onwards, Aristotle becomes very important. So incidentally, it's around Aquinas. So Aquinas has these commentaries on Aristotle in Latin. Right? So these are the first Latin commentaries on Aristotle that are important. Before that, they're all Greek. So Theophrastus is in Greek. So how do you assess the importance of somebody like Aquinas when in the Wikipedia database he's almost not there at all? Okay, that's an interesting question. And you can see that somebody like Duns Scotus is there, William of Ockham of the Occam's Razor. All of these guys are there, not really present in the Wikipedia. And there's a reason why, right? Because medieval Western philosophy is the least studied philosophy generally in modern academia. Lots of people study ancient. I mean, everybody likes Socrates. You know, he has a great story. He is martyred for his beliefs. But after Aristotle and before Descartes, there's a sort of desert, not a genuine intellectual desert, but one which is not studied that much in modern academia. So as a result, you're not generating enough text that will give you the nodes on those network.
Rajesh, there can be another one reason that the way our history and philosophy is taught in our academia, it's biased by common policies or intellectually they are biased towards something and they exclude some part of it. Can we see those trends also that where we have deviated from actual things?
Sure. The only problem, I mean, first of all, no academic philosopher will deny the importance of Aquinas, right? So what's interesting is that the discipline's own internal history of who is important and who is not reflected in the data. So that's really my question, is that how do you actually understand, I mean, so history is really a story being told about what is important and what's valuable, right? And the data seems to be giving you a very different idea of what's important and valuable. It's saying that Leo Strauss is actually more important than Thomas Aquinas, right? So that's a problem. The same thing you can see if you look at modern Western philosophy. So big name is Wittgenstein. Chomsky is almost as big, but strangely enough, you have people like Hume and Mill and James. It's people like Otto Preminger who nobody cares about. Again, because if you have a lot of fans in one particular corner, you're going to generate a lot of text. Right? John Locke is, so if you have Mill, Locke and Hume, the British philosophers, then you have James. But then suddenly, in a very ahistorical way, it's connected to Wittgenstein and Chomsky. Right? And you have Russell over there.
Rajesh, sorry, the problem that we are discussing right now, don't you think it lies more at the beginning how you choose your raw data and not about how the social network analysis generates something?
No, but my question is that however you generate raw data, unless you know exactly to where the needle is in the haystack, which is the hard problem for any kind of data analysis, you won't be able to extract the real meaning is what I'm trying to tell you, right? So what I'm saying is that from the perspective of an intellectual historian in this particular case, all you're seeing is the needle, right? It's like Arjuna trying to shoot the eye of the bird. But from the perspective of the enormous amount of text that you're seeing, and I'm saying that this won't be very different if you did a network analysis, let's say, of scientific collaboration networks, right? So one question would be, again, to do a similar analysis, take all the scientists who have lived, or at least for whom we have data in the last 300 years, and you look at their papers, and you look at joint citation indices and so on, and you use that to write the history of science versus what we all read right now, Newton, Galileo, Newton, and so on. I bet you would find that some very productive but completely unimportant, say, German scientists in the 19th century would become far more important than they are.
But this is just an extension of lies, damned lies, and statistics. You choose what whenever you do any kind of data analysis, you have to know what you expect.
No, but what I'm trying to say is that with the resurgence of what's called the digital humanities, can we do something better than either condemn all data analysis or condemn all ancient, whatever, the old style of history writing? Is there something that synthesizes the two, which points out, see, what this does really well is that it points out that, see, traditional history writing is always greatest hits. Battle of Panipat happened in whatever 1426, Babur defeated Lodi. I mean, that's the way we do history, right? Which is that you have some very important events and you tell a story on the basis of important events. What data-driven techniques give us a way of highlighting is all the enormous background against which those prominent events happen. That somebody like Shakespeare, for example, who we now, of all the Elizabethan playwrights, maybe we remember 3 people, right? Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Johnson. Most of you probably don't know the name of the actor who played Shakespeare's plays in the Globe, which in his own time he was by far the more famous person. Okay, Shakespeare was writing for this person. Okay, so therefore, but when you situate Shakespeare's output in that context and you show how much Shakespeare's language is influenced by other people, you get some interesting data, which you will never get from traditional history. So my question therefore really is, how do you combine the bottom-up data-driven techniques that will give you a diagram of this kind with the top-down techniques that traditional history writing in this case does? By the way, this is almost exactly the same problem for evolutionary biology, right? So you can do a study of evolutionary biology in the old style, or you can do it in the new style. Right? So you can, for example, try to clone the sequence and sequence the genome of every single organism and just try to extract the evolutionary tree out of that. And we're not that far from doing that. Metagenomics is getting there. I mean, I can just take a sample from pond scum and just analyze the genome of every single thing that I get in it. And that will give me some idea of how things are related there. But at the same time, there's the old style evolutionary biology which says that no, these are the moments where important things happen. Speciation happens when species are isolated from others. Those are all, so how do you reconcile the top-down approach, which is very selective, admittedly, and where a human is saying this is what is important versus that, while in a bottom-up approach where you can't tell that kind of approach that make the human being important. So how do we reconcile the two? That's really my question.
It's the same problem that search engines have, isn't it?
Yes.
If you search for Holocaust, then you get the 20 million pages that are deniers.
Yes, and therefore you have SEO optimizers who make a lot of money, selling you junk on how to get your page very high on Google's results, right? So there's an arms race between Google or Yahoo or Bing or whoever and pages which wants to get to the real thing, but the only thing that they have access to is the various data mechanically that can be extracted. So that's
think about the prediction of the network. I think we should find out what is the relationship? Is it one relationship or multiple relationships?
There are multiple relationships. So some of them are relationships of influence, some of them are relationships of mentorship in this diagram, and some of them are relationship of antagonism. So meaning I argue.
All put together into one graph?
Yes, all put together into one graph. Right. So for example, Voltaire is, so you have a link between Voltaire and Rousseau which is not friendly. There's of course Diderot and others who are writing the encyclopedia who influenced Rousseau. So Rousseau, incidentally, see how central he is in this. Similarly, you have Berkeley, Newton over there. What it shows you, first of all, is also how philosophy arises in the modern Western era by interactions between lots of people who are not philosophers. Right? So incidentally, that Wikipedia extraction has that is a major problem. But the only people you are seeing there are the people who we now call philosophers. Newton is actually not there. But Newton is very prominent in this one, because Newtonian ideas tremendously influence all kinds of philosophy. Same thing for the modern stuff. So Wittgenstein is there, but you can see how much more central Russell is in this picture than in the first one. Right? That's right. Russell is far less important than Wittgenstein, which might be true in current philosophy's estimate of the relative importance. But what's interesting is that network centrality, in the way that Professor Venimazan was mentioning, Russell is actually far more important. Meaning, of course, Wittgenstein was Russell's student. Russell also synthesizes influences from Frege and others who are in continental Europe with influences from people like Whitehead and McTaggart who are in England. So he is the place where sort of the continental tradition of philosophy gets integrated with the British tradition. So he was a Hegelian when he started and he becomes an empiricist later. Wittgenstein, of course, inherits that, right? So if you are therefore trying to understand why modern philosophy became the way it is, you would have to actually pinpoint Russell as the place where much of the initial work happens, even if Wittgenstein does more important work in that same line. And so, again, you look, this is for continental philosophy. See again Nietzsche. Nietzsche, of course, is the favorite philosopher, whether you, both for liking and for disliking. He's either responsible for the Holocaust, or he is a great, whatever, beacon of freedom or whatnot. And so Nietzsche is central in a way that, again, academic philosophers would never say this. Okay? And you have all these people like Foucault, Derrida, and so on. But it's actually somewhat different, again, if you go back to the Randall Collins thing, right? Goethe, for example, is a very important figure because Goethe is central to the German Romantic movement. I mean, he's the most important writer, and writers influence philosophy a lot. So that's really what I'm trying to get to, which is how do you reconcile these two pictures? How do you go combine the insights that one gets by really knowing some domain, right? Anand is not here, but Anand also likes to say that if you really want, I mean, you need domain expertise. You need people who really understand some body of work from the inside. So whether it is science, whether it is business analytics or whatever, you need people who understand from the inside how that works. But you also need automated tools where you don't need that insight at all. So how do you combine the expert system, which is human, with the mechanical system, which is machine-driven, especially in the understanding of things like social networks, which is ultimately, social networks are not about bits being sent from one machine to another. Maybe that's where the money is there to be made, but in terms of really understanding how human society or animal societies work, you have to understand how individuals actually learn from each other, propagate cultural trends, so on and so forth. So I don't have an answer to this question. I mean, I have some hunches, but I don't think we have a good answer to this question. But maybe Girish and others who work in industry where you have to deal with it will be able to give us an answer. Thank you.
But here, ultimately, you're dealing with small numbers.
So when you get to say scientists, so this is small because we don't actually know how large these intellectual communities were. We don't have the data, sadly.
Right? A few thousand.
Scientists are not that small. So if you visualize so if you scrape and say we are all the scientific databases, approximately 1 million people a year are writing papers. So that's not so small anymore. And the same kinds of issues will arise, right? That if you were to do a history of, let's say, physics in the 20th century, there are at least a few million physicists, I would imagine. And yet, in the standard history, you go from Einstein to Bohr to Heisenberg. I mean, it's 20 greatest hits. So I think the same problem would arise, which is that how do you take the data-driven approach, which says millions of people contributed in various numbers, versus the top-down approach, which just says these are the important.
So I'll still go back to the question that I asked you in between.
Okay, no problem.
So for this network, if the question is how many, who is the most cited philosopher, this is true. That's what they are basing this network on. So it all depends on what question you're asking and how you're inputting the initial data, right? But then if you want to use the same network for asking another question, for example, who was the most influential philosopher of that time, this network is false. So I'll still go back to that one, that when you're inputting your first set of data, that is where, I mean, you cannot just take all these names from random sources but answer something which it actually does not answer.
You're pointing out exactly something, I mean, that's right, but think about it this way, right? Which is, take Google's PageRank. It's essentially a citation algorithm. So, influence is very hard to measure. So what I'm saying is that if your data-driven approaches bias you towards things that can be measured, then you may never be able to get influence out of it. And that's really the question, which is that given that Plato is more important than Eric Vogelin, but they can't even be compared at all, how do you normalize for that in any approach which is just going to use citations, text that is publicly available? I mean, that's really hard.
I have a really very naive question. What I'm trying to understand is, what about populist trends, in West? As in, I saw that Hegel has a really large circle. I was recently involved in dialectics, which is why I know this business. Dialectics is really gaining importance now. So what if Hegel has a larger circle of influence? It becomes a popular, something that's newer, people are trying to find out now.
I should tell you, Hegel is not getting popular now. He's been popular for a while. Hegel is Marx's most important influence, right? So, and Marx is very important. So in that sense, everybody who does dialectics does because primarily they got Hegel through Marx. But be that as it may, these to me are facts. I mean, if lots of people are sitting in their living rooms reading Hegel, great for them. But whether that is, that's what I don't know how to reconcile that kind of popularity. A kind of person who would be very popular in that sense, who's not at all a philosopher, would be Malcolm Gladwell. Right? Everybody reads Outliers or Blink or one of those. And you could argue that it's only because, in a network era, somebody like that, somebody like Malcolm Gladwell can actually become much more influential than they would have been in a time when books were passed by hand. So that's possible. I don't know how long that influence will last. And that's the real issue.
This would be based on contemporary citations or?
This is just Wikipedia. This is only Wikipedia.
Okay. And Wikipedia data itself will be based on contemporary?
Yes, and it's by general janta deciding what is important and what not, right? And I like the openness of Wikipedia. I like the fact that anybody will contribute to it. I just don't know how to synthesize that with what might be a more long-term view of the importance of it.
This long tail business in all these access systems is what is creating the problem.
Yes.
Very less access to.
I have a question. Can I figure it out, contributor in Wikipedia, from which country or which area he comes?
I'm sure you have IP trace available, but I don't know if when you register, I don't contribute to Wikipedia, so I don't know what you have to declare when you contribute.
What was the question?
Can you find out where a person is from looking at it?
We can.
There was a tool some time ago, I think it's public release, where they tracked who made changes to Wikipedia pages. It was quite interesting. They found some big these guys who wanted to, public relations guys, they were making big changes to various organized pages.
Yes.
So Rajesh, what about for a particular time frame when you have peer-reviewed citations?
So even there, what I'm saying is that citation index, some people will correlate well both in terms of influence and citations. But, let me not name names, but there are some, say, for example, very prominent Indian scientists whose influence will be close to zero, but whose citation index will be very high. Right? So I'm just saying.
And those Wikipedia pages would be quite large.
Okay, so there you go. So I'm just saying, how do you correct for that? In fact, you will see this, right? So you might see more of it even in the science world. People are gaming the system exactly that way because grants, promotions, everything is driven by impact factors and citation indices. We already see people who are writing for that kind of publication factor. We all know that. My question is therefore, so this would be a fantastic project to do, which is do a study, so forget the last 5 years because this is when the fad is happening. So if you look at publications from 1990 to 2000 and look at the impact factor, because we would have the data for that period, can we contrast that with the ideas that now, so if you look at the drop-off of citations, that might give us interesting data on what remains valuable.
That is one proposal I used to have, even for the mental models and networks and so on, where the relationships are many. So that is the same point that I mentioned, putting it in a word. Number of citations, when you said influence, it is a composite various factors. So you have multiple networks, the same set of vertices, the networks are different. Now you have G1, G2, G3. You must somehow make some of the similarity measures or some distance measures between G1, G2, G3 on the same set of vertices. Then maybe, because they have amalgamated those influence factors into this network itself. So the beginning of the network.
So one interesting thing therefore to do would be what would happen if you took this network as a prior on the other one. I mean, so you could do a sort of Bayesian, and unfortunately the number of nodes are not commensurate, but it might be interesting to ask what would happen if you redrew that network using this one as a prior. It might be interesting.